Dragonlance, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Chapter 5. Farewell to Flint, arrows fly, message in the stars. Tannis swung over the porch and dropped down through the tree limbs to the ground below. The others waited, huddled in the darkness, keeping out of the light cast by the street lamps swinging in the branches above them. A chill wind had sprung up, blowing out of the north. Tannis glanced behind him and saw other lights of the search parties. He pulled his hood over his head and hurried forward. "Wind switched," he said. "There'll be rain by morning." He looked around at the small group, seeing them in the eerie, wildly dancing light of the wind-tossed lamps. Goldmoon's face was scarred with weariness. Riverwind's was a stoic mask of strength, but his shoulders sagged. Raceland, shivering, leaned against a tree, wheezing for breath. Tannis hunched his shoulders against the wind. "We've got to find shelter," he said. "Some place to rest."
Tannis. Tannis tugged on the half-elf's cloak. "We should go by boat. Crystal Lake's only a short way. There are caves on the other side, and it will cut walking time tomorrow."
"That's a good idea, Tass, but we don't have a boat."
"No problem,"
the Kender grinned. His small face and sharply pointed ears made him look particularly impish in the eerie light. Tass is enjoying all of this immensely, Tannis realized. He felt like shaking the Kender, lecturing him sternly on how much danger they were in. But the half-elf knew. It was useless. Kender are totally immune to fear. "The boat's a good idea," Tannis repeated after a moment's thought. "You guide. And don't tell Flint," he added. "I'll take care of that."
"Right,"
Tass giggled, then slipped back to the others.
"Follow me,"
he called out softly, and he started off once more. Flint, grumbling in his beard, stumped after the Kender. Goldmoon followed the dwarf. Riverwind cast a quick, penetrating glance around at everyone in the group, then fell into step behind her. "I don't think he trusts us," Caramon observed. "Would you?" Tannis asked, glancing at the big man. Caramon's dragon helm glinted in the flickering lights. His ringmail armor was visible whenever the wind blew his cape back. A longsword clanked against his thick thighs. A short bow and a quiver of arrows were slung over his shoulder. A dagger protruded from his belt. His shield was battered and dented from many fights. The giant was ready for anything. Tannis looked over at Sturm, who proudly wore the coat of arms of a knighthood that had fallen into disgrace 300 years before. Although Sturm was only 4 years older than Caramon, the knight's strict, disciplined life, hardships brought on by poverty, and his melancholy search for his beloved father had aged the knight beyond his years. Only 29, he looked 40. Tannis thought, "I don't think I would trust us either." "What's the plan?" Sturm asked. "We're going by boat," Tannis answered. "Oh no," Caramon chuckled. "Told Flint yet?" "No, leave that to me." "Where are we getting the boat?" Sturm asked suspiciously. "You'll be happier not knowing," the half-elf said. The knight frowned. His eyes followed the Kender, who was far ahead of them, flitting from one shadow to another. "I don't like this, Tannis. First we're murderers, now we're about to become thieves." "I don't consider myself a murderer," Caramon snorted. "Goblins don't count." Tannis saw the knight glare at Caramon. "I don't like any of this, Sturm," he said hastily, hoping to avoid an argument. "But it's a matter of necessity. Look at the plainsmen. Pride's the only thing keeping them on their feet. Look at Raceland." Their eyes went to the mage, who was shuffling through the dry leaves, keeping always in the shadows. He leaned heavily upon his staff. Occasionally, a dry cough racked his frail body. Caramon's face darkened. "Tannis is right," he he said softly. Race can't take much more of this. I must go to him. Leaving the knight and the half-elf, he hurried forward to catch up with the robed, bent figure of his twin. Let me help you, Raced, they heard Caramon whisper. Raceland shook his head and flinched away from his brother's touch. Caramon shrugged, dropped his arm, but the big warrior stayed close to his frail brother, ready to help him if necessary. Why does he put up with that? Tanis asked softly. Family, ties of blood. Sturm sounded wistful. He seemed about to say more, then his eyes went to Tanis's elven face with growth of human hair and fell silent. Tanis saw the look, knew what the knight was thinking. Family, ties of blood. They were things the orphaned half-elf wouldn't know about. Come on, Tanis said abruptly. We're dropping behind. They soon left the Valenwood trees of Solace and entered the pine forest surrounding Crystal Lake. Tanis could faintly hear the muffled shouts far behind them. They've found the bodies, he guessed. Sturm nodded gloomily. Suddenly, Tasselhoff seemed to materialize out of the darkness right beneath the half-elf's nose. The trail runs a little over a mile to the lake, Tass said. I'll meet you where it comes out. He gestured vaguely, then disappeared before Tanis could say a word. The half-elf looked back at Solus. There seemed to be more lights, and they were moving in this direction. The roads were probably already blocked. Where's the Kender? Flint grumbled as he plunged through the forest. Tanis is meeting us at the lake, Tanis replied. Lake? Flint's eyes grew wide in alarm. What lake? There's only one lake around here, Flint, Tanis said, trying not to smile at Sturm. Come on, we'd better keep going. His elven sight showed him the broad red outline of Caramon and the slighter red shape of his brother disappearing into thick woods ahead. I thought we were just going to lie low in the woods for a while. Flint shoveled his way past Sturm to complain to Tanis. We're going by boat, Tanis moved forward. Nope, Flint growled. I'm not getting in any boat. That accident happened 10 years ago, Tanis said, exasperated. Look, I'll make Caramon sit still. Absolutely not, the dwarf said flatly. No boats. I took a vow. Tanis, Sturm's voice whispered behind him. Lights! Blast! The half-elf stopped and turned. He had to wait a moment before catching sight of the lights glittering through the trees. The search had spread beyond Solus. He hurried to catch up to Caramon, Raceland, and the plainsman. Lights! He called out in a piercing whisper. Caramon looked back and swore. Riverwind raised his hand in acknowledgement. I'm afraid we're going to have to move faster, Caramon. We'll make it, the big man said, unperturbed. He was supporting his brother now, his arm around Raceland's thin body, practically carrying him. Raceland coughed softly, but he was moving. Sturm caught up with Tanis. As they forced their way through the brush, they could hear Flint puffing along behind them, muttering angrily to himself. He won't come with us, Tanis, Sturm said. Flint's been in mortal fear of boats ever since Caramon almost accidentally drowned him that time. You weren't there. You didn't see him after we hauled him out. He'll come, Tanis said, breathing hard. He can't let us youngsters go off into danger without him. Sturm shook his head, unconvinced. Tanis looked back again. He saw no lights, but he knew they were too deep in the forest now to see them. Viewmaster Toad may not have impressed anybody with his brains, but it wouldn't take much intelligence to figure out that the group might take to the water. Tanis stopped abruptly to keep from bumping into someone. What is it? He whispered. "We're here," Caramon answered. Tanis breathed a sigh of relief as he stared across the dark expanse of Crystal Mill Lake. The wind whipped the water into a frothy white caps. "Where's Tass?" He kept his voice low. "There, I think." Caramon pointed to a dark object floating close to the shore. Tanis could barely make out the warm red outline of the Kender sitting in a large boat. The stars gleamed with icy brightness in the blue-black sky. The red moon, Lunitari, was rising like a bloody fingernail from the water. Its partner in the sky, Solinary, had already risen, marking the lake with molten silver. "What wonderful targets we're going to make," Sturm said irritably. Tanis could see Tasselhoff turning this way and that, searching for them. The half-elf reached down, fumbling for a rock in the darkness. Finding one, he lobbed it into the water. It splashed just a few yards ahead of the boat. Tanis, reacting to Tanis' signal, propelled the boat to shore. "You're going to put all of us in one boat?" Flint said in horror. "You're mad, half-elf." "It's a big boat," Tanis said. "No, I won't go. If it were one of the legendary white-winged boats of Tarsus, I still wouldn't go. I'd rather take my chances with the Therocrat." Tanis ignored the fuming dwarf and motioned to Sturm. "Get everyone loaded up. We'll be along in a moment." "Don't take too long," Sturm warned. "Listen." "I can hear," Tanis said grimly. "Go on." "What are those sounds?" Goldmoon asked the night as she came up to her. "Goblin search parties," Sturm answered. "Those whistles keep them in contact when they're separated. They're moving into the woods now." Goldmoon nodded in understanding. She spoke a few words to Riverend in their own language, apparently continuing conversation Sturm had interrupted. The big plainsman frowned and gestured back toward the forest with his hand. "He's trying to convince her to split with us," Sturm realized. "Maybe he's got enough woodlord to hide from the goblin search parties for days, but I doubt it." "Riverwind, Gulando," Goldmoon said sharply. Sturm saw Riverwind scowl in anger. Without a word, he turned and stalked toward the boat. Goldmoon sighed and looked after him, deep sorrow in her face. "Can I do anything to help, lady?" Sturm asked gently. "No," she replied. Then she said sadly, as if to herself, "He rules my heart, but I am his ruler. Once, when we were young, we thought we could forget that, but I have been chieftain's daughter too long." "Why doesn't he trust us?" Sturm asked. "He has all the prejudices of our people," Goldmoon replied. "The plainsmen do not trust those who are not human." She glanced back. Tanis cannot hide his elven blood beneath a beard. Then there are the dwarf and the Kender. "And what of you, lady?" Sturm asked. "Why do you trust us? Don't you have these same prejudices?" Goldmoon turned to face him. He could see her eyes, dark and shimmering in the lake behind her. "When I was a girl," she said in her deep, low voice, "I was a princess to my people. I was a priestess. They worshipped me as a goddess. I believed in it. I adored it. Then something happened." She fell silent, her eyes filled with memories. "What was that?" Sturm prompted softly. "I fell in love with a shepherd," Goldmoon answered, looking at Riverwind. She sighed and walked toward the boat. Sturm watched Riverwind wade into the water and drag the boat closer to shore as Raceland and Caramon reached the water's edge. Raceland clutched his robes around him, shivering. "I can't get my feet wet," he whispered hoarsely. Caramon did not reply. He simply put his huge arms around his brother, lifted him easily, as he would have lifted a child, and then set Raceland in the boat. The mage huddled in the aft of the boat, not saying a word of thanks. "I'll hold her steady," Caramon told Riverwind. "You get in." Riverwind hesitated a moment, then climbed quickly over the side. Caramon helped Goldmoon into the boat. Riverwind caught hold of her and steadied her as the boat rocked gently. The plainsman moved to sit in the stern, behind Tasselhoff. Caramon turned to Sturm as the night drew near. "What's happening back there?" "Flint says he'll burn before he'll get into a boat. At least then he'll die warm instead of wet and cold." "I'll go up and haul him down here," Caramon said. "You'd only make things worse. You were the one that nearly drowned him, remember? Let Tanis handle it. He's the diplomat." Caramon nodded. Both men stood, waiting in silence. Sturm saw Goldmoon look at Riverwind in a mute appeal, but the plainsman did not heed her glance. Tasselhoff fidgeted on his seat, started to call out a shrill question, but a stern look from the knight silenced him. Raceland huddled in his robes, trying to suppress an uncontrollable cough. "I'm going up there," Sturm said finally. "Those whistles are getting closer. We don't dare take any more time." But that moment he saw Tanis shake hands with the dwarf and began to run towards the boat alone. Flint stayed where he was, near the edge of the woods. Sturm shook his head. "I told Tanis the dwarf wouldn't come." "Stubborn as a dwarf, so the old saying goes," Caramon grunted. "And that one's had 148 years to grow stubborner." The big man shook his head sadly. "Well, we'll miss him, that's for certain. He saved my life more than once." "Let me go get him. One punch to the jaw and he won't know whether he's in a boat or in his bed." Tanis ran up, panting, and heard the last comment. "No, Caramon," he said. "Flint would never forgive us. Don't worry about him. He's going back to the hills. Get in the boat. There are more lights coming this way. We left a trail through the forest. A blind gully dwarf could follow." "No sense in all of us getting wet," Caramon said, holding the side of the boat. "You and Sturm get in. I'll shove off." Sturm was already over the side. Tanis patted Caramon on the back, then climbed in. The warrior pushed the boat out into the lake. He was up to his knees in the water when they heard a call from the shore. "Hold it!" It was Flint running down from the trees. A vague moving shape of blackness against the moonlit shoreline. "Hang on! I'm coming!" "Stop!" Tanis cried. "Caramon, wait for Flint!" "Look!" Sturm half rose, pointing. Lights appeared in the trees, smoking torches held by goblin guards. "Goblins, Flint!" Tanis yelled. "Behind you! Run!" The dwarf, never questioning, put his head down and pumped for shore, one hand on his helm to keep it from flying off. "I'll cover him," Tanis said, unslinging his bow. With his elven sight, he was the only one who could see the goblins behind the torches. Fitting an arrow to his bow, Tanis stood as Caramon held the boat steady. Tanis fired at the outline of the lead goblin. The arrow struck it in the chest, and it pitched forward, on its face. The other goblins slowed slightly, reaching for their bows. Tanis fitted another arrow to his bow as Flint reached the shoreline. "Wait! I'm coming!" The dwarf gasped as he plunged into the water and sank like a rock. "Grab him!" Sturm yelled. "Tas, row back. There he is. See, the bubbles." Caramon was splashing frantically in the water, hunting for the dwarf. Tas tried to row back, but the weight in the boat was too much for the kender. Tanis fired again, missed the mark, and swore beneath his breath. He reached for another arrow. The goblins were swarming down the hillside. "I've got him!" Caramon shouted, pulling the dripping, sputtering dwarf out by the collar of his leather tunic. "Quit struggling," he told Flint, whose arms were flailing out in all directions. But the dwarf was in a complete state of panic. A goblin arrow thunked into Caramon's chainmail and stuck there like a scrawny feather. "That does it," the warrior grunted in exasperation, and with great heave of his muscular arms, he pitched the dwarf into the boat as it moved out away from him. Flint caught hold of a seat and held on, his lower half sticking out of the edge. Sturm grabbed him by the belt and dragged him aboard as the boat rocked alarmingly. Tanis nearly lost his balance and was forced to drop his bow and catch hold of the side to keep from being thrown into the water. A goblin arrow struck into the gunwale, just barely missing Tanis's hand. "Row back to Caramon, Tass," Tanis yelled. "I can't!" shouted the struggling Kender. One swipe of an out-of-control oar nearly knocked Sturm overboard. The knight yanked the Kender from his seat. He grabbed the oars and smoothly brought the boat around to where Caramon could get a hold of the side. Tanis helped the warrior climb in, then yelled to Sturm, "Pull!" The knight pulled on the oars with his strength, leaning over backward as he thrust the oars deep into the water. The boat shot away from the shore, accompanied by the howls of angry goblins. More arrows whizzed about the boat as Caramon, dripping wet, plopped down next to Tanis. "Goblin target practice tonight," Caramon muttered, pulling the arrow from his mail shirt. "We show up beautifully against the water." Tanis was fumbling for his dropped bow when he noticed Raceland sitting up. "Take cover," Tanis warned, and Caramon started to reach for his brother, but the mage, scowling at both of them, slipped his hand into his pouch on his belt. His delicate fingers drew out a handful of something as an arrow struck the seat next to him. Raceland did not react. Tanis started to pull the mage down, then realized he was lost in the concentration necessary to a magic user for casting a spell. Disturbing him now might have drastic consequences, causing the mage to forget the spell, or worse, miscast the spell. Tanis gritted his teeth and watched. Raceland lifted his thin, frail hand and allowed the spell component he had taken from his pouch to fall slowly from between his fingers onto the deck of the boat. Sand, Tanis realized. "As Tasarak Sanelrian Kawini," Raceland murmured, and then moved his right hand slowly in an arc parallel to the shore. Tanis looked back toward the land. One by one, the goblins dropped their bows and toppled over, as though Raceland were touching each in turn. The arrows ceased. Goblins farther away howled in rage and ran forward. But by that time, Sturm's powerful strokes had carried the boat out of range. "Good work, little brother," Caramon said heartily. Raceland blinked and seemed to return to the world. Then the mage sank forward. Caramon caught him and held him for a moment. Then Raceland sat up, sucked in a deep breath, which caused him to cough. "I'll be all right," he whispered, withdrawing from Caramon. "What did you do to them?" asked Tanis as he searched for enemy arrows to drop them overboard. Goblins occasionally poisoned the arrow tips. "I put them to sleep." Raceland hissed through his teeth that clicked together with the cold. "And now I must rest." He sank back against the side of the boat. Tanis looked at the mage. Raceland had, indeed, gained in power and skill. "I wish I could trust him," the half-elf thought. The boat moved across the star-filled lake. The only sounds to be heard were the soft, rhythmic splashing of the oars in the water, and Raceland's dry, racking cough. Tasselhoff uncorked the whitened skin, which Flint had somehow retained on his wild dash, and tried to get the chilled, shivering dwarf to swallow a mouthful. But Flint, crouched at the bottom of the boat, could only shudder and stare out across the water. Goldmoon sank deeper into her fur cape. She wore the soft doeskin breeches of her people with fringed overskirt and belted tunic. Her boots were made of the soft leather. Water had sloshed over the edge of the boat when Caramon had thrown Flint aboard. The water made the doeskin cling to her, and soon she was chilled and shivering. "Take my cape," Riverwind said, in their language, starting to remove his bearskin cloak. "No." She shook her head. "You've been suffering from the fever. I never get sick, you know that. But," she looked up at him and smiled, "you may put your arm around me, warrior. The heat from our bodies will warm us both." "Is that a royal command, chieftain's daughter?" Riverwind whispered teasingly, drawing her close to him. "It is," she said, leaning against his strong body with a sigh of contentment. She looked up into the starry heavens, then stiffened and caught her breath in alarm. "What is it?" Riverwind asked, staring up. The others in the boat, although they did not understand the exchange, heard Goldmoon's gasp and saw her eyes transfixed by something in the night sky. Caramon poked his brother and said, "Wraith, what is it? I don't see anything." Raceland sat up, cast back his hood, then coughed. When the spasm passed, he searched the night sky. Then he stiffened, his eyes widened. Reaching out with his thin, bony hand, Raceland clutched Tanis's arm, holding onto it tightly as the half-elf involuntarily tried to pull away from the mage's skeletal grip. "Tanis," Raceland wheezed, his breath nearly gone. "The constellations." "What?" Tanis was truly startled by the pallor of the mage's metallic gold skin and the feverish luster in his strange eyes. "What about the constellations?" "Gone," rasped Raceland, and lapsed into a fit of coughing. Caramon put his arm around him, holding him close, almost as if the big man were trying to hold his brother's frail body together. Raceland recovered, wiped his mouth with his hand. Tanis saw that his fingers were dark with blood. Raceland took a deep breath, then spoke. "The constellations known as the Queen of Darkness, and the one called the Valiant Warrior, both gone. She has come to Kryn, Tanis, and he has come to fight her. All the evil rumors we have heard are true. War, death, destruction." His voice died in another fit of coughing. Caramon held him. "Come on, Race," he said soothingly. "Don't get so worked up. It's only a bunch of stars." "Only a bunch of stars," Tanis repeated flatly. Stern began to row again, pulling swiftly for the opposite bank.